Wing Commander Jeffrey Harrison pulled his Spitfire into a dive, pursuing a Messerschmitt Bf 109 that had broken formation over the English Channel. The German pilot executed a sharp -G pushover, diving steeply while the aircraft experienced momentary weightlessness. Harrison followed, pushing his control stick forward to match the maneuver. His Rolls-Royce Merlin engine coughed, sputtered, and died completely for 3 agonizing seconds as fuel starvation hit the carburetor during the -G transition. Those 3 seconds were enough. The Messerschmitt pulled away while Harrison's Spitfire fell like a stone, engine silent, propeller windmilling uselessly. Training took over. Harrison pushed the nose down further to regain positive G-force, and the Merlin caught back to life as fuel resumed flowing to the carburetor. By the time power returned, the German fighter had disappeared into cloud cover. Harrison landed at RAF Tangmere 30 minutes later, furious and frustrated. This was the 4th time in 6 weeks that carburetor starvation had cost him a kill during -G maneuvers. The Spitfire was a magnificent aircraft in almost every respect. Fast, maneuverable, well-armed. But it had one fatal flaw that German pilots had learned to exploit. Any maneuver that produced negative G-force, a pushover, an outside loop, even a too aggressive dive, would starve the carburetor of fuel. The engine would die just long enough for the enemy to escape or gain advantage. Same problem? Asked Squadron Leader Thomas Whitmore, meeting Harrison on the flight line. He didn't need to elaborate. Every pilot in the squadron knew about the carburetor issue. It was a dirty secret of the Spitfire, the flaw that official reports minimized but that pilots lived with every time they engaged enemy fighters. 3 seconds of dead engine at exactly the wrong moment, Harrison confirmed, pulling off his flight helmet. The Hun knew exactly what he was doing. He pushed over hard. My engine quit, and he was gone before I could recover. Meanwhile, the American P-51s are doing -G maneuvers all day long with no engine interruption. How is that possible? They're using the same basic Merlin engine we are. Whitmore had been asking himself the same question. The Americans had arrived in Britain flying P-51 Mustangs powered by Packard V 1650 engines, license copies of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin. On paper, they were identical engines. In practice, the American version had capabilities the British version lacked. American pilots reported no carburetor issues during -G flight. They could execute any maneuver without fear of engine failure. I've put in a request to inspect an American engine, Whitmore said. Command approved it. We're sending a technical team to an American base next week to examine AP-51 and compare their engine configuration to ours. Something's different, and we need to know what. The technical inspection team assembled at RAF Debden, where the American 4th Fighter Group operated P-51B Mustangs. Leading the British delegation was Henry Thompson, chief engineer for Rolls-Royce and the man who had overseen development of the Merlin engine. Thompson had designed much of the original Merlin, had watched it evolve through multiple variants, and considered himself intimately familiar with every aspect of its operation. He expected the American version to be a straightforward copy, perhaps with minor manufacturing differences, but nothing fundamental. The Americans were hospitable and cooperative, providing complete access to their aircraft and engines. Captain Robert Mitchell, the American engineering officer, walked Thompson to the P-51's engine bay while maintenance crews worked on adjacent aircraft. The Packard V 1650 is essentially your Merlin, Mitchell explained. We built it under license, following Rolls-Royce specifications, but we did make some modifications for manufacturing efficiency and to address specific operational issues. Thompson examined the engine carefully, noting the familiar architecture, the supercharger, the cylinder banks, the cooling system, all exactly as he had designed them. But then he noticed something unfamiliar near the carburetor, additional components that weren't present in the British version. "What's this system here?" he asked, pointing to a complex arrangement of pumps and fuel lines. "That's the Bendix-Stromberg pressure carburetor with fuel injection," Mitchell replied. It replaced a standard float-type carburetor that was causing fuel starvation during -G maneuvers. The injection system maintains constant fuel pressure, regardless of aircraft orientation. No more engine cuts during pushovers or inverted flight. Thompson stared at the fuel injection system with growing realization. This wasn't a minor modification. This was a fundamental reimagining of how fuel was delivered to the engine. The British Merlin used a traditional float carburetor that relied on gravity to maintain fuel level. During negative G conditions, fuel would float away from the carburetor jets, causing momentary starvation and engine failure. The American system used pressurized fuel injection that worked regardless of gravity or aircraft orientation. When did you implement this modification? Thompson asked, his mind racing through the implications. Early 1943, Mitchell answered. We identified the negative G issue during test flights and contracted Bendix-Stromberg to develop a solution. They adapted existing fuel injection technology from our bomber engines. Implementation added about 15 pounds to engine weight and increased manufacturing complexity slightly. But the operational advantages were worth it. Our pilots can now perform any aerobatic maneuver without worrying about engine failure. 15 pounds and slightly increased manufacturing complexity. That was a trade-off between an engine that worked perfectly in most conditions and an engine that worked perfectly in all conditions. Thompson felt a mixture of admiration for the American solution and frustration that British engineers hadn't identified and solved this problem themselves. Thompson spent the next 3 hours examining every aspect of the fuel injection system, taking detailed notes and photographs. The Bendix-Stromberg pressure carburetor was an elegant solution to a problem that British engineers had known about but never prioritized. The system used an engine-driven fuel pump to maintain constant pressure, feeding fuel through precisely calibrated injection nozzles directly into the intake manifold. The entire system was mechanically controlled, requiring no electrical components that might fail in combat conditions. We knew about carburetor starvation, Thompson admitted to Mitchell as they reviewed technical diagrams in the engineering office. Rolls-Royce engineers documented the issue in 1940. We developed a temporary fix, a metal diaphragm that helped retain some fuel during brief negative G moments. It reduced the problem but didn't eliminate it. German pilots learned they still had about a 2-second window where our engines would cut out. Mitchell nodded sympathetically. We encountered the same issue during early P-51 flights with a standard Merlin carburetor, but our operational doctrine emphasizes aggressive fighter tactics that frequently involve negative G maneuvers. We couldn't accept any engine interruption, even briefly, so we prioritized fixing it. The difference in priorities was telling. British fighter doctrine had evolved around the capabilities and limitations of existing aircraft. Pilots learned to avoid extreme negative G maneuvers because their engines couldn't handle them. Tactics were developed that worked within those constraints. The Americans, arriving later to the air war with fresh perspectives, had simply refused to accept the constraint. They identified the limitation and engineered it away rather than adapting tactics around it. Thompson returned to Derby with comprehensive documentation of the American fuel injection system. He presented his findings to Rolls-Royce senior management in a meeting that became contentious. The engineering solution was clear, but implementing it would require retooling production lines, retraining mechanics, and modifying thousands of existing engines in the field. The costs were significant, and Britain's industrial capacity was already stretched thin. How critical is this modification? Asked Sir Arthur Sidgreaves, managing director of Rolls-Royce. Our Spitfires are performing admirably in combat. Are we really prepared to disrupt production for what amounts to a marginal improvement? Thompson chose his words carefully. Sir, I wouldn't characterize it as marginal. The American pilots have a significant tactical advantage. They can execute maneuvers that our pilots must avoid. In a dogfight, that translates to more kills and fewer losses. The Germans are already exploiting our carburetor limitation. They know that if they can force a British fighter into negative G flight, they gain several seconds of advantage while our engine cuts out. Wing Commander Harrison, invited to the meeting to provide operational perspective, spoke more bluntly. Gentlemen, I've lost 4 kills in the past 2 months because my engine died at critical moments. Other pilots are reporting similar experiences. The Luftwaffe has adapted their tactics specifically to exploit this weakness. When we pursue an enemy fighter, they push over into a dive, knowing our engines will quit. By the time we recover, they've escaped or reversed position on us. The Americans don't have this problem. Their P-51s maintain power through any maneuver. The comparison to American capabilities was a decisive argument. Britain couldn't afford to field aircraft inferior to those flown by their American allies. The decision was made to implement fuel injection on new Merlin production and to develop retrofit kits for existing engines. But the timeline was discouraging. New production wouldn't begin for 6 months, and retrofit kits wouldn't be available for at least a year. Meanwhile, American P-51 Mustangs were demonstrating the tactical advantages of fuel injection in combat over Europe. Squadron leader Edward Miller, flying as an exchange pilot with the American 357 Fighter Group, experienced the difference firsthand. During a mission over Germany, he engaged a Focke-Wulf FW-190 that attempted the standard German tactic of pushing over into a negative G dive. Miller followed without hesitation, pushing his stick forward aggressively. The Packard Merlin maintained full power through maneuver. No cough, no sputter, no interruption. He stayed on the German fighter's tail through the dive, through the recovery, and through a series of rolling maneuvers that would have been impossible in a Spitfire. The FW-190 pilot, probably expecting the American engine to fail like British engines did, seemed confused by Miller's persistent pursuit. Miller lined up the shot and fired his .50 caliber round, stitching across the German fighter's wing and fuselage. After the mission, Miller submitted a detailed report to RAF Command emphasizing the operational significance of fuel injection. "The psychological advantage alone is substantial," he wrote. "I can pursue enemy aircraft aggressively without fear of engine failure. I can execute defensive maneuvers that would be suicidal in a Spitfire. The German pilots haven't adapted to fighting opponents whose engines work reliably in all attitudes. This gives us an edge they're not prepared for." British engineering teams began reverse engineering the American fuel injection system, but they quickly discovered that simple copying wouldn't work. The Bendix-Stromer design was optimized for American manufacturing processes and tooling. British factories would need to adapt the design to their own capabilities and supply chains. Thompson led a team that redesigned the system for British production, simplifying some components while maintaining the essential functionality. By late 1943, prototype fuel injection systems were being tested on Merlin engines at Rolls-Royce's Hucknall facility. Test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland conducted a series of aggressive aerobatic maneuvers designed to induce carburetor starvation in standard Merlins. The fuel-injected version maintained power flawlessly through inverted flight outside loops and violent pushovers that would have killed a carbureted engine instantly. "This is transformative," de Havilland reported after the test flights. "The engine behavior is completely different. I can fly any maneuver without even thinking about fuel starvation. It becomes one less thing to worry about in combat, which means more mental bandwidth for tactics and situational awareness. That's a significant advantage." Production implementation proved more challenging than testing. British factories were already operating at maximum capacity, producing standard Merlins for Spitfires, Hurricanes, Lancasters, and Mosquitoes. Adding fuel injection systems required new assembly procedures, additional quality control steps, and coordination with suppliers who were also stretched thin. The Ministry of Aircraft Production allocated resources for conversion, but progress was slower than anyone wanted. By mid-1944, the first fuel-injected Merlin engines began reaching RAF squadrons, but in limited numbers. Priority was given to frontline fighter units operating over Europe, where combat intensity was highest. Wing Commander Harrison's squadron received their first fuel-injected Spitfires in June, 15 months after Thompson had first examined the American system at RAF Debden. Harrison's first combat flight with a modified engine was a revelation. He engaged a pair of Bf-109s over France and executed a series of negative G maneuvers that would have been impossible in his previous aircraft. The engine maintained full power throughout, responding instantly to throttle inputs regardless of aircraft attitude. When one Bf-109 attempted the familiar pushover maneuver that had saved so many German pilots before, Harrison followed without hesitation. The German pilot seemed surprised to find the Spitfire still on his tail, with engine roaring at full power. Harrison's gun spoke, and the Bf-109 went down trailing smoke. It's like flying a completely different aircraft, Harrison reported during the post-mission debrief. The tactical options have expanded dramatically. Maneuvers that were forbidden or dangerous are now routine. I can fight the way the Americans have been fighting all along, aggressively, with confidence that my engine will respond when I need it. But the slow rollout meant that most RAF squadrons were still flying carbureted Spitfires, while American units had universal fuel injection coverage. This created an uncomfortable reality where Allied aircraft using essentially the same engine had significantly different capabilities. British pilots observed their American counterparts performing aerobatic sequences that remain off-limits in RAF doctrine because most Spitfires still couldn't handle them safely. The situation became a source of frustration and some embarrassment within RAF command. Squadron leader Whitmore, now promoted to group captain and serving in a planning role, wrote a confidential memo addressing the issue. We find ourselves in a peculiar position of having invented the Merlin engine, licensed its production to America, and then fallen behind in implementing improvements that the Americans developed. Our aircraft are being outperformed by modified versions of our own engine. This is operationally significant and speaks to broader issues in how we approach engineering development and implementation. The memo triggered a review of British aircraft development processes. What emerged was a picture of an industrial system optimized for wartime production volume, but less effective at incorporating incremental improvements. British factories focus on producing large numbers of proven designs. Modifications required extensive testing, approval through multiple bureaucratic layers, and coordination across supply chains that were operating at capacity. The Americans, with newer factories and less constrained industrial capacity, could implement improvements more rapidly. Thompson found himself defending Rolls-Royce's decisions before a parliamentary committee investigating aircraft production. We identified the carburetor issue in 1940, he testified. We developed a partial solution that reduced but didn't eliminate the problem. Should we have prioritized a complete solution earlier? In hindsight, yes, but we were simultaneously developing more powerful engine variants, improving reliability, increasing production volume, and addressing dozens of other technical challenges. Resources were finite. Every engineering effort devoted to fuel injection was engineering effort, not devoted to other critical improvements. The committee member questioning him was unmoved. Mr. Thompson, the Americans received your engine design in 1940. By early 1943, they had identified and solved the fuel injection problem. British pilots are still flying aircraft with the original flaw in 1944. How do you explain this timeline discrepancy? Thompson paused, choosing his words carefully. The Americans had the advantage of being able to focus on optimization rather than production volume. Their industrial capacity allowed them to pursue improvements while maintaining output. Our industrial capacity required choosing between improvements and volume. We chose volume, which may have been a wrong decision operationally, even if it made sense from a production standpoint. The hearing highlighted a fundamental tension in British wartime production. The push for maximum quantity sometimes conflicted with a need for maximum quality. American industry, larger and less constrained, could often achieve both simultaneously. British industry had to make harder trade-offs. By autumn 1944, approximately 40% of RAF fighter aircraft had been converted to fuel injection. The remainder will be converted gradually as they cycled through maintenance or were replaced by new production. But the slow rollout meant that some pilots were still experiencing carburetor failures in combat more than a year after the solution had been proven. Squadron leader Thomas Crawford, flying a non-injected Spitfire during a mission over Belgium, experienced this firsthand. He engaged a German fighter that executed the predictable pushover maneuver. Crawford followed. His engine died for 2 seconds, and in that brief window the German fighter reversed position and damaged Crawford's aircraft badly enough that he had to make an emergency landing behind Allied lines. He survived, but the experience left him bitter. I was flying inferior aircraft because production priorities meant I hadn't received the modification yet, Crawford told investigators after returning to his squadron. The engineering solution existed. The Americans proved it worked 18 months ago, but I was still flying with the original flaw because we couldn't implement improvements fast enough. That's not an engineering failure. It's a systemic failure of how we develop and deploy technology. The American implementation of fuel injection also revealed another advantage. They had shared the technology freely with Britain, but Britain had been slow to adopt it. There had been no secrecy, no proprietary restrictions. American engineers had provided complete documentation, answered all questions, and offered manufacturing assistance. The delay was entirely on the British side, caused by production constraints and bureaucratic processes, rather than any lack of cooperation from the Americans. This reality created some awkwardness in Allied relations. The Americans were too polite to directly criticize British delays in adopting proven improvements, but a performance gap between fuel-injected P-51s and carbureted Spitfires was obvious to anyone who flew both aircraft. Some American pilots privately joked about British fighters having that old carburetor problem, jokes that stung because they were based on observable technical reality. Wing Commander Harrison, now flying a fuel-injected Spitfire Mark IX, met with American P-51 pilots during a combined mission planning session. They compared notes on tactics, and Harrison admitted the British disadvantage that had existed until recently. For over a year, you chaps were flying aircraft that could do things ours couldn't. You had freedom of maneuver that we lacked. That's a significant tactical advantage that came down to one relatively simple engineering modification. Captain Mike Sullivan, an experienced P-51 pilot, responded diplomatically. The Spitfire is a hell of a fighter. Commander, the fuel injection was just one piece of the puzzle. You guys figured out fighter tactics that we learned from you. We added the injection system because our engineers focused on that specific problem. Different approaches, both valuable. By early 1945, nearly all frontline RAF fighters had been converted to fuel injection, and the performance gap with American aircraft had been eliminated. But the episode had prompted serious reflection within British aviation circles about how engineering improvements were identified, developed, and implemented. Henry Thompson became a leading voice advocating for process reforms that would prevent similar delays in the future. Thompson published a technical paper in the Journal of the Royal Aeronautical Society titled Lessons from the Fuel Injection Implementation. The paper was unusually candid for an official publication, acknowledging mistakes and proposing systemic changes. We created an excellent engine, Thompson wrote, but we failed to create an effective process for continuously improving that engine based on operational feedback. The Americans, receiving our design as a baseline, established improvement processes from the beginning. They treated the licensed Merlin not as a finished product, but as a platform for optimization. The paper identified several specific failures in the British development process. First, operational feedback from pilots about carburetor issues had been documented, but not prioritized for engineering action. The problem was known but considered an acceptable limitation, rather than a critical flaw requiring urgent solution. Second, when the American solution was identified, the implementation process moved too slowly due to bureaucratic approvals and production constraints. Third, there was insufficient direct communication between combat pilots and design engineers, meaning operational priorities didn't always align with engineering priorities. Thompson's proposed reforms included embedding engineers with operational squadrons to observe problems firsthand, creating rapid prototyping processes for testing solutions quickly, and establishing clearer pathways for implementing proven modifications without disrupting production volume. Some proposals were adopted immediately. Others would take years to fully implement. The fuel injection story also became a case study in Allied cooperation and technology transfer. The Americans had freely shared their improvement with Britain, expecting nothing in return beyond the general understanding that Allied success benefited everyone. This generosity was noted and appreciated, creating goodwill that extended beyond aviation into other areas of military technology cooperation. Wing Commander Harrison, now promoted to group captain and serving in an advisory role at the Air Ministry, used a fuel injection case in presentations about Allied cooperation. The Americans took our engine design, improved it, and gave us back the improvements without hesitation, Harrison told a gathering of senior RAF officers. That's genuine alliance behavior. They could have kept the fuel injection system proprietary, maintaining a performance advantage for their own aircraft. Instead, they shared everything freely. we should remember that when we develop our own improvements to shared technologies. The post-war analysis of air combat statistics revealed the operational significance of fuel injection more clearly than wartime assessments had. British fighters showed a marked increase in kill ratios after fuel injection implementation, and a corresponding decrease in losses due to engine failure during combat maneuvers. The improvement wasn't dramatic. No single modification could transform combat outcomes, but it was measurable and significant. Squadron Leader Miller, who had flown both fuel-injected and carbureted variants extensively, provided detailed testimony for the post-war analysis. The psychological impact was as important as the technical capability, Miller explained. Knowing that your engine would work reliably in any maneuver gave you confidence to fight aggressively. Pilots flying carbureted aircraft had to maintain some mental reservation, always aware that certain maneuvers might cause engine failure. That reservation, that tiny hesitation, could be the difference between victory and defeat in a dogfight. The fuel injection modification became standard on all post-war British fighter engines. The Rolls-Royce Griffin, which powered late-war Spitfires and post-war aircraft, incorporated fuel injection from initial design rather than as a retrofit. British engineers had learned that fundamental systems like fuel delivery needed to be optimized for all operating conditions, not just normal flight. The lesson influenced everything from jet engine development to automotive engineering. Henry Thompson retired from Rolls-Royce in 1950, looking back on a career that had seen the Merlin engine evolve from an experimental power plant to one of the most successful aircraft engines in history. In his retirement speech, he addressed the fuel injection story directly. We created something magnificent with the Merlin, but we also learned humility. We learned that invention is only the beginning. Continuous improvement matters. Listening to operators matters. Learning from others who build on your work matters. The Americans took our engine and made it better. That wasn't a defeat. It was validation that we had created something worth improving. And their willingness to share those improvements with us demonstrated what genuine alliance means. The Packard V1650 continued in American service through the end of the war, powering P-51 Mustangs that achieved air superiority over Europe and the Pacific. The fuel-injected engine became so reliable that pilots often forgot it had ever been a limitation. In post-war interviews, American P-51 pilots expressed surprise when told about the carburetor issues that had plagued early Merlins. "Our engines just worked," was a common response. We never thought about fuel starvation because it wasn't a problem. That simple statement, "Our engines just worked," represented the goal of all engineering effort. The best technology becomes invisible, so reliable that users forget it's there. Fuel injection had transformed the Merlin from an engine that required careful handling to an engine that simply performed flawlessly under all conditions. That transformation, accomplished by American engineers building on a British foundation, exemplified how Allied cooperation could produce results neither nation could have achieved alone. The British Spitfires and American Mustangs that flew together in the final year of the war were, in many ways, the same aircraft despite their different origins. Both used variants of the Merlin engine. Both had learned from each other's operational experiences. Both had been refined through combat into highly effective fighting machines. The fuel injection story was just one example of how technology evolved through shared effort, how improvements developed by one ally benefited everyone, and how the willingness to learn from others was as important as the ability to innovate independently. Wing Commander Harrison, reflecting on his experiences years after the war, summarized the lesson simply. "We invented the Merlin, the Americans improved it, and together we defeated the Luftwaffe." That's how alliances should work. Not competing to prove who's better, but building on each other's strength to achieve what neither could accomplish alone. The fuel injection system was a small thing, technically speaking, but it represented something larger, the willingness to acknowledge that good ideas can come from anywhere, and that implementing those ideas matters more than protecting pride. The story of Britain copying the American P-51 engine only to miss the fuel injection modification became a classic case study in engineering education. Universities use it to teach lessons about continuous improvement, operational feedback, and the importance of implementation speed. The technical details were fascinating, But the human lessons were more important. How pride can delay progress, how bureaucracy can slow innovation, and how the best engineering solutions often come from listening to the people who actually use the technology. In the end, both nations benefited from the collaboration. Britain got a better engine. America got to demonstrate the value of allied cooperation. Pilots on both sides got aircraft that performed better in combat. And the engineers who worked on the fuel injection system, both American and British, got the satisfaction of knowing they had solved a real problem that saved real lives. That was the ultimate measure of engineering success. Not patents or papers or recognition, but people who came home because the technology worked when they needed it most. Engineering excellence isn't about who invents something first. It's about who makes it work best. The Americans took a British engine, identified its weakness, fixed it, and shared the solution freely. The British, after some delay, adopted the improvement and made their aircraft better. That cycle of invention, improvement, and sharing is how technology advances and how alliances triumph. If stories about how cooperation beats competition resonate with you, subscribe to our channel for more moments when working together accomplish what rivalry never could. Sometimes the best engineering isn't about being first. It's about being willing to learn from those who build on your work.